quite generally, before we get started, what are some of the debates about time within philosophy that you find interesting?
Yeah, so there's lots of debates about time. I guess probably the most central one, which has a lot of ramifications for other debates, is I think the debate you've talked about in previous episodes between the so-called A theory of time and the B theory of time. So there's different ways to introduce this kind of debate. I actually kind of like introducing it via a kind of detour, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
So first, let's start with philosophical debates about the nature of possibility and necessity, so modality, because actually debates in time are very analogous in interesting ways, and I think those analogies are relevant. So in debates about modality, so it's the study of what's possible and what's necessary. So we think among the things that are true, some of them didn't have to be true, like that I wore a blue shirt, I could have worn a different colored shirt, but we think some of them had to be true. And so philosophers start talking about possible worlds when this issue comes up. So there's different sort of maximally specific ways things could have been, and those are possible worlds. And so there's one philosophical view that's very much a minority niche view where it says all possible worlds are concretely existing and on a par. That's
David Lewis.
The modal realist kind of view, a very niche view. And that view says, look, there are modal statements, like there could have been flying pigs, and those are made true by like concretely existing flesh and blood flying pigs out there.
They're just not spatio-temporally connected to our world.
Yes. So that's a very radical kind of view. The more normal view, and also that view has a kind of indexical conception of the actual world. They think by the actual world, we just mean the world we happen to inhabit. By contrast, the sort of more popular view is that there's only the actual world. Even though there are statements about what could have been, and there are these facts, but they're not made true by like concretely existing stuff out there. So that's the sort of standard view that most people have. And basically the exact same debate you can do in the metaphysics of time. So question, are all times equally on a par concretely existing stuff? Some people say, yes, all times, past, present, future are on a par. There's nothing special about the present. They're all concretely existing flesh and blood things. And then statements about the past and the future are made true by these concretely existing stuff. So the fact that there were dinosaurs is made true by concrete flesh and blood dinosaurs in some other region of this four-dimensional block. But then there's this other view that says no, and also that view has a kind of indexical conception of the present. By the present moment, we just mean the moment we happen to be located in. And then there's the presentist view that says, no, time is not like that. Time is sort of like modality in the sense that only the present is real, just like only the actual stuff is real. And there are facts about the past and the future. There are facts about what did happen and what will happen. But these facts shouldn't be understood in this sort of, in terms of concrete flesh and blood kind of things. Just like in the modality case, most people think it's true that there could have been flying pigs. That doesn't mean that there's concrete flesh and blood flying pigs. Similarly, it's true that there were dinosaurs. That doesn't mean that they're concrete flesh and blood dinosaurs. So that's a major difference in the metaphysics of time. There's lots of other debates I could introduce.
I mean, one disanalogy is that we are not spatio-temporally connected to these other possible worlds, we are presumably temporally connected to these other instances of time.
Yeah, that's certainly true. Yeah. That's certainly a disanalogy. Yeah.
Okay. And one thing that you didn't mention is how necessity is cashed out in terms of possible worlds.
Yeah. Yeah. So possibility is something's possibly the case just in case there is at least one possible world where that's the case. And necessity is something it's necessary just in case it's true in all the possible worlds. So
is there a connection to the time there too?
In time case, you can say like it was always the case that such and such, and that's like it's true at all the times. Or you can say it's sometimes the case that, which means that there's only one time. And so, because these analogies go pretty deep, so if you study like modal logic and temporal, there's something called temporal logic, which is actually fairly similar. You know, there's these temporal operators, modal operators, and they're understood in terms of possible worlds in the one case and times in the other case. So yeah, there's a pretty close connection there as well.
Cool. And just a couple of other things, because I think our listeners are probably interested in getting some of the philosophical vocabulary down.
Sure.
You used a term indexicality a couple of times.
Yeah.
It comes up in lots of areas of philosophy. How do you think about just what it means?
Yeah, so indexical statements, I guess, are like context-sensitive statements that depend on like who's speaking of it. So when I say I refer to David. When you say I, you refer to Robinson. And And these indexical things aren't supposed to be anything like metaphysically special. So for example, there's an indexical here, which is where I happen to be at. Different speakers will refer to different places by here, but most people don't think there's anything metaphysically special about here. So it's a kind of deflationary understanding of the relevant concept. But for example, the presentist doesn't understand the present merely as indexical, because they could just say the present time is the one that exists. So there's this non-indexical characterization of the present time, like the one that exists and the other ones don't. So that one doesn't depend on who's speaking or anything like that. Cool. Yeah. So the A theory is a kind of umbrella term for any view that in some sense takes the present time to be special. And so presentism is probably the most popular version, but there's other versions out there. The B theory goes with this kind of block universe picture where all times are equally real and concrete.
So what are some of those other debates that are going on
so
that you
there's
find
lots of
interesting?
other, there's debates about how things persist across time. So the main choice point here is, I guess, a view called endurantism. And then there's a family of other views, but maybe the most common is perdurantism. So how do things persist across time? We normally think that lots of things do persist across time, like my water bottle will exist tomorrow and existed yesterday. So how does it manage to do that? The endurantist thinks my water bottle is a three-dimensional thing, and it exists at multiple different times by the whole thing existing at multiple different times. It doesn't exist at multiple times merely by having proper parts of it at different times. And the other view says, like, my water bottle is a four-dimensional worm, and it persists across time by having different parts at different times. So just to take a simple example, so imagine a world with like a single particle going in a straight line. So the endurantist will think there's only one thing that exists, a particle, and it's going in a straight line. And the perdurantist will think, actually, there's sort of infinitely many different particle slices that exist that are distinct from one another, and there's this like particle worm that's composed of these distinct particle slices. And so the endurantist says just there's a single particle moving in a straight line, and the perdurantist says there's infinitely many distinct ones. So that's one kind of debate. And it actually has some interesting connections with the presentism, eternalism debate. So in particular, there's a lot of people have thought there's a kind of tension between the eternalist view that all times are equally real and concrete, and the endurantist view that things persist by being sort of wholly present at each time, not by having temporal parts. And that's because if you think of the spatial case, it's very weird to think like something could exist at two spatial locations, not by part of it being here and part of it being there, but just like the whole thing is over here, and also the whole thing is over there at the same time. That seems very strange. Some philosophers think there are such things like universals or maybe certain kind of time travelers or something. But in any case, it seems very strange that there's a single object at two places at once. And if you're a presentist, you don't have these weird like existing at multiple places at once, because there's only the present time. The past and future aren't concretely existing stuff. But if you're an eternalist, you think there's this whole four-dimensional block, and there's this thing that exists completely at one region of the block and completely at another region of the block, and not by having different parts at different parts of the block. And there's a word that this involves like kind of contradiction. So imagine, this is the so-called problem of temporary intrinsics that people talk about. So imagine a banana that goes from yellow to green. On the temporal parts way of thinking of, there's just like a part of the banana that's yellow and a part of it that's green, no problem. But if you think like it's the very same banana, it's not parts of it, like the whole banana is yellow and the whole banana is green, then it almost seems like a contradiction. And so there's worries about that. So anyway, so I think maybe one natural thing for the presentist to have is a kind of endurantist conception, and maybe one natural thing for the block universe person to have is a kind of sort of slices view. And yeah, I think there's a lot of other downstream consequences of whether you want to be an endurantist and perdurantist that are all really interesting, but maybe take a bit of time to explore. But anyway, those are, I guess, two views about time.
I've talked to, as you know, David Albert, Tim Mondlin, these people on the issue. I've also talked to Lee Smolin a bit about time, and he identifies himself as a very radical presentist. So there are radical presentists in the physics community. I take it, though, are you a presentist?
I think I guess my evolution on this topic is I used to have this sort of normal view that B-theoretic eternalism was like the scientifically respectable view. So I sort of used to have that view. But there was like a day where I sort of saw the light. I sort of saw the motivations behind presentism, and now I think it's much more defensible. I'm not sure if I'm committed to it at the end of the day, but I just think it's much more defensible than a lot of people take it credit for.